Recording now. So we left off talking about the difference between vertical integration and horizontal integration. And the vertical integration goes hand in hand with what we were talking about as far as conglomerations go. So Disney and AT&T and NBC and all that, Comcast, tend to be vertically integrated because they, in days past, in years past, before conglomerates were more popular, oftentimes media companies had to ship some of the jobs out in order to get them finished. So a movie studio could create a movie, but then they would have to make a deal with a distribution company to get that movie to theaters and eventually get that movie to DVDs and get the DVDs distributed to, you know, the Blockbusters and other videos and video rental stores and places where you can buy DVDs. Now, many of these conglomerates have their own distribution section. So from top to bottom, every job that one needs in order to create and distribute a piece of media content is often done under the banner of one company. So Disney certainly has its own means of both producing content and distributing content, and all steps in the middle. And that's really what this idea of conglomerates and vertical integration means. And horizontal integration, you could look at more kind of monopolistic tendencies. And we talked about the video game industry on Wednesday, that if you are a gamer and you own a console, it's either Sony, Microsoft, or Nintendo. Not a lot of other competitors in the video game industry there. You can also think of cable companies as well. I have to spend a good deal of time on the phone with Suddenlink this weekend because they just billed me for stuff I don't have, like cable. So last time I was on the phone with Suddenlink, it took about an hour and a half, and they sent me to 4 or 5 different people. So it was not a pleasurable experience for me. And I'm dreading that it's going to be even worse tomorrow when I have to argue over my bill. But that's, you know, and if there were other competitors in the Bryan College Station area, I would dump Suddenlink in a second. But unfortunately, there aren't. So, yeah, well, yeah. So that's Suddenlink, and again, Suddenlink, Cox, Comcast back before it merged with NBC, all the Insight, Xfinity, all of those tend to be monopolistic. And if you've lived in different regions of this country, you probably know that a cable company like Cox controls a particular region, right? And if you want cable and internet, or even if you just want internet, you have to go through that company. All right. So, yeah, like I said, I got transferred to 4 or 5 different people when I called Suddenlink, and I'm pretty sure the first person I talked to was somewhere else in the US, and then after about the 4th or 5th time, I found a person who was actually in Bryan. So that's going to be most of my Saturday tomorrow. So I'm very looking forward to that very much. So the last part of this chapter, chapter 2, and I have posted the chapter for next week as well. I posted that yesterday, so that's under course materials. It will be chapter 3 out of the Havens and Lots book. So again, the last part of this chapter deals with all of the different strategies of ownership, strategies ownership can use in order to, as best they can, decrease the risk involved in the media industries, decrease the risk involved in creating a media text and hoping that it turns out to be a hit, but not really knowing if it will or won't. So this particular strategy is called economies of scale, and I believe I discussed this a little bit on Wednesday or Monday. that in the very early days of radio, or even some radio stations today that have weaker signals, that their signal doesn't really travel much farther than the town where their station is in. Because of that limited reach, they had fewer advertisers willing to spend money. And that's how stations were able to create their content and pay their staff, oftentimes was through advertising money. And if you have fewer advertisers willing to do business with you, because you don't have a very big audience, because of lack of signal strength, then it wasn't very profitable for early days of radio, and some radio stations today. And it usually costs a lot more to produce their own material and create their own content and pay their staff. But we have a lot of network-controlled radio, and especially network-controlled TV stations. You can just drive around Bryan College Station, and eventually you'll see an NBC affiliate or an ABC affiliate. Why are local TV stations affiliated with big-time networks? Well, because of money. They get money from those big networks to help pay for some of the content. And this content oftentimes is created at the headquarters of these big networks, whether they be in New York or LA. And content is sent down to the local stations. And really, the only issue the local stations have to worry about is putting on their own news programs, their own local news programs, and whatever else local programming they have, which anymore is not much. Most local programming is on PBS or cable access stations. But the only other worry they have is in what order they run this content from the main companies. So they get more money, they're able to pay their staff more, and they still obviously worry about advertising dollars, but it's not make or break if they don't get huge advertising revenue. I like how chat all day is just going to be complaints about Suddenlink. Well, another funny little story about Suddenlink, and which is why I would just rather give up on them. I have not been able to access my Suddenlink web account for about a year now, and I didn't really care about it because Suddenlink is the one bill I'll still pay by check. But I went in there several months ago to, went to the website several months ago to check on, what I was paying for, and I entered my username and I entered what I thought was my password, and the password wouldn't work. So then they have that security question, and the security question was, what was the name of your best childhood friend? For the last 6 months, I have been entering every childhood friend I ever had, and it still won't allow me in. So I've not had access to my Suddenlink account forever. And yeah, I would love to have a different cable company to choose from, or internet provider to choose from, but it's just not happening because of horizontal integration. So moving on now to other ownership strategies. Again, the rest of this chapter is just going to deal with ways in which ownership reduces or tries to reduce risk. And this one is economies of scope that talk about how a studio can decrease production costs when they have a wide array of products to go along with a new release. So, of course, every time there is a blockbuster movie that is released, what do you know, or what do you think is going to follow? Well, video games probably based on that movie, action figures and other toys for kids based on that movie, books, fan fiction, all of that merchandise helps offset costs that a studio will put into a movie. Because if the movie doesn't do quite as well as at the box office as they had hoped, well, hopefully they can recoup some of that money with the sales of action figures or video games, right? When I was a kid growing up, it seemed like every movie, and I think that's still the case, every action movie or Star Wars type movie they would do some sort of deal with McDonald's or some other fast food restaurant where if you went in and ordered a Happy Meal, you got yourself some sort of toy associated with that blockbuster movie or action figure associated with that blockbuster movie. So again, another way for studios to recoup any potential losses. And now, because there are so many conglomerates, we have this cross promotion where you can get the word out even more about a new piece of media that you're creating, a movie or a TV show, because it might be more difficult, right? Folks aren't watching as much cable as they used to. So you have to spend your advertising dollars in many different channels on many, whether it be TV or social media or different pop-up ads on websites. But think of Disney. If Disney is releasing a new movie, and this oftentimes happens, I'll go to the ESPN's website in the morning to check scores, and the first thing that will pop up is some new Pixar movie or some new Disney movie, some new pop-up ad for that or banner ad for a new movie. So because, of course, Disney owns ESPN, that's part of the cross-promotion for that new movie. And if you've been watching any of the NBA playoffs, every once in a while they'll have commercials featuring NBA stars, and because the game is on ESPN or ABC, because remember both of those are owned by Disney, the basketball players will talk about, oh, there's this new movie coming out that I really want to see, right? They'll be in the commercial for the movie. So it's all kinds of cross promotion for this. And I remember years ago when everyone's favorite athletic competition, Dancing with the Stars, debuted. That was on ABC, right? And I'd get up in the morning and I'd turn on ESPN to whatever Talking Heads show was on ESPN. And it always struck me as odd because they would go over sports scores from the night before and talk about, who played well, who didn't play well, who was traded, who wasn't traded, all these types of regular sports discussions. But then ESPN would do a little break and talk about the results from the previous night's Dancing with the Stars. I'm like, this is odd. This doesn't seem sports-like, but they had to because, again, ESPN and ABC, both owned by Disney. So cross-promotion, cross-discussion about a particular type of media text that may have absolutely nothing to do with your usual audience, with your general audience. And a great example of how that works, many years ago, I was in New Orleans when I was still at LSU. I was in New Orleans and I was having dinner with a couple of friends of mine who had come down to visit me from Indiana, husband and wife. And we're all sitting at the table, and my friend Megan, she keeps looking behind me, and her eyes are wide open like she sees someone. And finally, I kind of turn around, but I can't tell who she's looking at. And she finally looks at us. She goes, "That's Mark Cuban sitting behind us." And I turned around even more because, of course, I'm not afraid to make an idiot of myself and stare right at him. And I go, "Yeah, that is Mark Cuban. Wow." And as soon as I said, "Yeah," because I don't think my other friend knew who Mark Cuban was, and I said, "Yeah, that's the owner of the Dallas Mavericks," right as Megan, his wife, says, "That's the guy from Dancing with the Stars." So Mark Cuban is two different people to two different friends, depending on what media you watch. All right, moving on. Other ownership strategies. You ever notice how you see the same faces over and over and over again on TV shows? There is a point to that. Oftentimes, to avoid risk, TV executives and movie executives don't want to try anything new. What once worked should work again, seems to be their motto. So if Kelsey Grammer, the guy on the left there, who was one of the few TV actors to be on two of the biggest TV sitcoms of all time, Cheers first, and then Frasier, which was the character he played, a spinoff of Cheers. And of course, we know Neil Patrick Harris, hopefully, from How I Met Your Mother. And then 20 years ago, when I was growing up, he was Doogie Howser, MD. And in between that, he helped Harold and Kumar go to White Castle, which is kind of how he got discovered again. And of course, Tim Allen. Tim Allen, Home Improvement, now Last Man Standing. And it's the point behind this is, if you have had some success in the past, especially as a TV actor, they'll keep hiring you because they know that the audience will recognize your face and the audience likes familiar type of content. Let's see what's going on in chat. Or Shark Tank too, yeah. Well, you also notice that every season of Dancing with the Stars will at least have one or two sports personalities on them. It could be sports journalists, it could be athletes, and that's so they can draw in the ESPN audience. I think, for all you Cowboys fans, Michael Irvin was on there a few seasons ago, and, that's so the folks who usually just watch ESPN for sports information or to watch games might click into Dancing with the Stars just to see how Michael Irvin's doing, and then when Michael Irvin is voted off, they'll probably not watch as much, but at least they watch those few episodes. Another way that ownership tries their best to reduce risk is through spin-offs. Spin-offs and sequels, known as known products. So obviously, the thinking goes, if a sitcom is a huge success, like if we take the picture on the left there, Young Sheldon being a spinoff of Big Bang Theory, Private Practice being a spinoff of Grey's Anatomy, and The Cleveland Show being a spinoff of Family Guy, three huge TV shows over the past 15, 20 years. The thinking is, if the original show was a huge success, then the spinoff is going to be a fairly decent success. Maybe not as blockbuster as the original show, but it's still going to be pretty popular. Not so much with The Cleveland Show. That kind of came and went after about 5 years. And I don't know about Private Practice. Someone is going to have to inform me more. But it seems like there have been so many spinoffs of Grey's Anatomy that Private Practice is one of 3 or 4, I think. And I think Young Sheldon's doing all right. It's probably doing as well as CBS expected. But if the product itself, if the brand itself is successful, then the assumption is, so will the spinoff. But we talked about this last week. For every Frasier, which of course was a huge hit, didn't quite eclipse Cheers, but that's because most TV critics think Cheers is one of the greatest shows ever. But they also feel that way about Frasier as well. But for every Frasier, we have a Joey, right? We talked about Joey. Joey didn't do so well. Now, that might be because Frasier was kind of a minor character on Cheers. He wasn't one of the major characters. Wasn't one of the main 2 or 3 characters on Cheers. Whereas Joey, everybody on Friends, all those 6 friends were of equal status. There wasn't one friend that was more important than the others. So perhaps that's one reason why Joey didn't work. Spinoffs don't always work, but TV studios are trying their best to bet that they will. Well, and Madeline, I think that's kind of the point, though. I don't think most TV execs expect the spinoff to be as good as the original, but they expect it to be successful because the original was successful. I don't think anybody's expecting Young Sheldon, anybody at CBS is expecting Young Sheldon to be as huge as Big Bang Theory. But they know that that known brand of Big Bang Theory and that known character of Sheldon will probably attract more viewers than just a regular new TV show that has no connection to an older TV show. I'm trying to think of any other examples. I think Frasier is the closest we have to a spin-off being almost as successful as the original. But if anyone else can think of any examples, feel free to throw them in the chat. Oh, and here we go. Let's see. Daria, was Daria bigger than Beavis and Butthead, though? I don't know. I'd have to look at that. I think 20 years later, folks remember Beavis and Butthead more than they remember Daria. But I think Daria was a very, very important step because it was one of the first adult cartoons, if you will, that had a female lead character. Yeah, Star Trek's a good example. That's a good example. Quite possibly, yeah. Because it seems like the original Star Trek did better after it went off the air. That it had kind of a small cult following while it was on TV, and then after the original series was canceled, it blew up into the you know, the franchise that it is today. Has there ever been a spinoff that's better than the original? That's a good question. That's what we're trying to figure out. And you know, better is a subjective term, of course. There are a lot of people who liked Frasier better than Cheers, but as far as success, you know, critical success, a lot of TV critics will rank Cheers as one of the, probably top 5 comedies of all time, I would think. All right, more strategies, formatting, known formats. Media tend to, again, this is, so if you're catching a theme here, it's that oftentimes content creators and producers don't like to try anything new. They like to stick with what is safe, and they like to stick with what is similar. Because they think if the audience recognizes the title and it's a sequel, the audience recognizes a couple of the main characters or actors, then they're more likely to watch that movie or TV show rather than it was, you know, a movie you've never heard of with an actor you've never heard of. And indeed, that's why we have so many sequels of so many different movies. I talked about the American Pie franchise a couple of days ago. I don't know what American Pie they're on. I think it's up to 9 or 10, but the last several of them were not released for theaters, just straight to DVD or straight to Netflix now. And why is that? Well, if you still buy DVDs and you're walking through Best Buy and you're trying to find something to watch, you will recognize that name, American Pie. You're like, oh yeah, I remember loving the first 1 or 2 or 3 of these movies, so 9 must have a few laughs in it. I don't think anyone's expecting part 9 to be as good as part 1 or part 2. But if it still stars Eugene Levy, the guy that played the dad in the original, then yeah, it's good for a few laughs. May as well buy it. It's safe, it's familiar. And content creators are counting on you buying it for that reason. And also formatting is for, you know, we talked a little bit about movies becoming video games and popular books becoming movies. Talked about Stephen King. Radio stations sticking to one format. Now again, that's changed quite a bit. Actually, I'm not sure it has changed. It's changed in that with now satellite and subscription radio, it's changed in that there are many, many more channels for you to choose from. But they are even more specifically formatted now. So before satellite radio, before subscription radio, if you were into classic rock, you knew there were 1 or 2 classic rock radio stations in your hometown. You could kind of scan between the 2 of them. Now, if you pay for radio, you can probably find a channel devoted to just one band, one artist. So even more niche, right? We talked about niche media for a specific audience. Now, instead of just classic rock, here's that one band that you really, really love, an entire station devoted just to them. And now, instead of sports talk radio, we have stations devoted just to football, just to NFL, just to college football, just to the SEC, just to the Big Ten. And they know that's going to be more successful. Better Call Saul, I think, is a wait and see. I think Better Call Saul has a chance. Yeah. I think we should check back in about 3 or 4 years. But that's a pretty good example. What about something like Pandora that made radio stations like that? But yeah. Yeah, and I remember loving Pandora when it first came out, and then about a year later hating Pandora because to me, once I chose the artists I wanted to create radio stations from and follow radio stations from, it seemed like they would play a few songs or 1 song or 2 songs from that artist, and then they'd play a bunch of different songs that I didn't have any interest in. So the connection between the artists that I created the station for and the other music they played seemed kind of weird. And then after a while, after a year of listening to Pandora, I just realized that they played the same 5 or 6 songs over and over again. That, so it did. I don't know. I had a love-hate relationship with Pandora at the beginning. So, how do we get media out of creating stuff that is safe and familiar? If we asked content creators, if we asked bigwigs at movie studios and broadcast networks why they keep creating the same old, they would probably say, well, it's what the audience wants. And I hate to say it, but in a lot of cases, they'd be right. You might be sitting there thinking, God, I wish Hollywood would come out with something new and original and different. But box office numbers say otherwise. TV ratings, Nielsen ratings on broadcast networks say otherwise. Studio execs get gun shy if they do try something new and interesting, and it doesn't work. It backfires. And nobody watches it, and it gets canceled. They're going to be less likely to try something like that again. Somebody mentioned Better Call Saul, which of course is a spin-off of Breaking Bad. Hopefully, even though we're a different setup this semester, hopefully I'll be able to play you a clip of Vince Gilligan, the creator of Breaking Bad. He talks about how he shopped his idea for Breaking Bad to many different networks and cable stations until AMC finally gave him the green light. So a lot of networks and cable stations passed on Breaking Bad. One of the biggest shows of the last 15 years. And he said a lot of reasons that folks passed on it was because it was too edgy. They, you know, it seems kind of obvious, but they didn't like the idea of a high school teacher who makes meth on the side. Go figure. They didn't think that would be successful. So that's why they don't try a lot of risky stuff. And that's why, but also we expect things to fit a certain formula. So another part of formatting is just these standard features. If we're watching a network show, we know to plan 30 minutes or 60 minutes of our time. And if it's a network show, we at least have commercials where we can go to the bathroom or go get something from the kitchen. If we're binging these shows on Netflix, we know that all we have to do is make it through 22 minutes, and then we can go get a snack. Or 48 minutes if it's an hour-long show. And of course we can pause it. You know, that helps too. But there's really no rule or law that says that TV studios have to make a show 30 minutes, especially if it's going straight to Netflix, straight to Hulu, straight to Prime. These are all unwritten rules that content creators still follow because they know that's what the audience expects. Now, if you are a huge, huge blockbuster show, you can get away with bending these unwritten rules a little bit. We've talked with both affection and hatred about the final season of Game of Thrones last year. But I noticed as I was watching them that, you know, they'd sometimes go from 48 and 50 minutes, and some of those final episodes were like an hour and 5, an hour and 12, an hour and 18 minutes. And I didn't mind because I was already hooked. But I wonder how many shows in the first season of Game of Thrones, before it became a huge hit, were an hour and 10, an hour and 15. Probably not a lot. Because even a blockbuster show like Game of Thrones that changed TV started off being kind of safe. So what do all these formatting issues say about the media consumer? That we like our routine. Harry Potter was rejected by 12. I didn't know that. That's interesting too. Yeah. How would you like to be those 12 publishers right now? Makes you wonder if they're still in the publishing business. So again, what do all these issues of formatting say about the media consumer? That we're kind of creatures of habit. That as much as a few of us might scream for new and interesting entertainment, there's a larger number of folks out there who still just want the familiar, the safe. But you also got to know for every Breaking Bad, Game of Thrones, there are tens of hundreds of other edgy original shows that never got picked up, that didn't make it. Of course, every station, every broadcaster, cable network, or streaming service would love to have the next Breaking Bad. But the odds of a show like Breaking Bad becoming as hugely successful as Breaking Bad did, kind of astronomical. So that's why most TV execs, when they hear of a Breaking Bad type of show, something that's kind of edgy, something that's kind of new, and they're faced with that, or they're faced with another Grey's Anatomy spinoff, they're probably going to go with what's safe. And look, the Grey's Anatomy spinoff might be good. Probably will be good. But they're going to go with what's safe because they want to make money and they want to keep their jobs. So last thing we'll talk about. Are media conglomerations good or bad for media consumers? So this is the last couple of pages of this chapter. Havens and Lotz discuss this issue. And really there are two schools of thought. The first school of thought is, yes, conglomerations are bad because they keep pumping out the same old, same old. Conglomeration equals homogenization. If it's top down, all we're going to hear is the same message over and over and over and over again. And not even perhaps where we're talking about movies or TV studios. I think I've mentioned Sinclair Broadcasting Group a couple of times. As you can see there, they own around 200 TV stations across the U.S. And they ran into a little trouble a couple of years ago because they made all of their local news anchors on all the stations they owned around the country read a script at the beginning of their newscast or as like a commercial bump talking about, there's a lot of fake news out there, but you can always trust us here at whatever station in whatever city. And all of the local news stations that weren't owned by Sinclair said, what are you calling us fake news? You're trying to say that you can only trust the stations that are owned by Sinclair? And a lot of critics looked at it as like a hostage reading a letter. Some of the anchors for Sinclair didn't actually want to make that statement. They didn't look too excited making that statement into the camera. So is there a problem with that kind of ownership? Is there a problem when one wealthy company owns so many different local media, local TV stations around the country? How much influence does a company like Sinclair have on a local TV station in Nevada or Kentucky or Pennsylvania about what stories they report on and what stories they don't, especially what national stories they report on? Especially a story that might make Sinclair look bad or might make a political candidate that Sinclair supports look bad. So that's one school of thought. Media conglomerations are bad because it's just the same old, same old. You would think the other school of thought is media conglomerations are good. Now the other school of thought is we don't know yet. Stay tuned. That really the conglomerate is a relatively new phenomenon. And that the bigger the conglomerate, the more likely all the different parts of it are so distant from one another that they don't really care what the other company is doing. My example is, does ESPN really care what goes on at Pixar? Occasionally ESPN will have to cross-promote a new movie made by Pixar, but that's about it. That's the extent of it. And this is actually the point of view that Havens and Lotz support. They're not really sure yet. We have to wait it out. But they say that a perspective like the original one, that all conglomerates are bad, gives us this kind of attitude that all media are the same. And that's something that Havens and Lotz, and I would agree with them on this, would like to get away from. Every time I hear somebody say, well, the media has blown this issue out of proportion, my response always is, what media? And the media is not a monolith. So when you say the media has blown this out of proportion, be more specific. What network? What journalists? What ownership group? Are you talking TV media? Are you talking newspapers? Are you talking social media? Because the media are in competition with each other. The media don't really act in lockstep. Especially news organizations. News organizations are all trying to scoop each other, trying to get the main story first. So to say that all, especially all news media, act as one would be incorrect. Anything else on chat? All right. So that's it for today. Anything else? Anything on Zoom left to chat about? Any questions? All right. Have a good weekend.
You as well, Dr. Rold.
Thank you. Thank you.
You too.